Welcome to the Business Wilderness. Today I have a very special guest with me, Mr. Loren Feldman. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Welcome and thank you for coming onto the show. It's with great honour and pleasure to have you on the show. Let's quickly give the wider audience a bit of an introduction, a bit of a background check, as they say, on who you are, what you currently do, and where you've been before.
Sure. I'm a journalist. I fell in love with journalism when I was in college. I spent way too much time at my school newspaper and way too little time on my studies, but found a career, really loved it. Initially, I worked for a lot of magazines. Most of them went out of business, some while I was working for them, which was really difficult. Nobody told me that this internet thing was coming and would devastate the industry that I had chosen. Had I known that, I might have done something different, although it's actually been really interesting and a lot of fun, and I enjoy what I do. At a certain point, I stopped working at primarily general interest publications, and I went to a magazine called Inc., which was founded around 1980 and kind of became the Bible of entrepreneurship. They got ahead of this wave of interest in entrepreneurship as a print magazine in this country. I went there in 2002. It had been around for a while. I went there thinking I might do what I had done at a lot of other magazines, which was help the editor kind of rethink the magazine, redesign it a little bit, and then move on and do something else. But a couple of things happened. One, I really liked it a lot. I fell in love with the subject matter. I really enjoyed meeting the entrepreneurs, getting to know their creativity. I knew business journalism a little bit before that, but I thought business was about Wall Street. I didn't understand that, it's one thing to risk other people's money. It's another thing to risk your own money. And I found that a lot more interesting. So I stuck around, in part for that reason, and in part because the economy changed and it became a lot harder to change jobs, even if I'd wanted to. I did that for about 6 years. Then I went to the New York Times, and they kind of asked me to lead their entrepreneurial coverage and create a web vertical for them. It was a topic that they hadn't really focused on previously. I did that for about 6 years with them. And then Forbes asked me to come here and do something similar. This magazine has always been about entrepreneurship, but they hadn't focused as tightly on the startup ecosystem, on small business, on different aspects of it as they thought they could. And they hired me to rethink their web vertical and their coverage of entrepreneurship, really both online at Forbes.com and also in the print magazine. And I've been here for a little over 2 years doing that.
Awesome. So now your current role is the Senior Editor of Entrepreneurship at Forbes.
That's right.
Which is a very interesting role because you guys would have insight to many successful stories through the world of entrepreneurship, many failures, and all round. So what are some of the patterns and trends that you guys see day in, day out that entrepreneurs or these entrepreneurial companies are basically going through?
It's really interesting. It's such a fascinating time to be covering entrepreneurship. I think there are some misleading aspects to it. Everybody talks about this as if it's the golden age of entrepreneurship, but it's kind of interesting. At least in America, entrepreneurial rates are actually down a little bit. There are fewer companies being started per capita than there were years ago, and there are a lot of theories about that. Some of it has to do with student debt and reasons that people are finding it hard to start companies right now. So we track that pretty carefully. I think it's really interesting. Another thing, 30 years ago, people weren't proud to get out of college, get an MBA, and go start a business. That meant you'd failed. You hadn't been able to get a job on Wall Street or with a big company. It wasn't the cool thing to do. now it is the cool thing to do, and there's all kinds of support for the entrepreneurial ecosystem. You know what I'm talking about. There are accelerators. MBAs are very different today. If you go to a business school, there's a lot more focus on entrepreneurship than there used to be. Once you get out of school, there's all kinds of accelerators, there are all kinds of programs, small business development centers, the SBA. There are all sorts of ways to get help if you're struggling starting a business. And yet, failure rates for businesses are every bit as high as they used to be. And I find that really interesting. I'm not sure how to explain that. I don't know why that is, but it's something that we cover a lot.
Could that be, with the internet, we do have many more resources. We can easily access things that we never used to be able to. But one thing we're missing is that's available to everyone. So that's going to increase the level of competition across the board. Could that maybe be a reason why we're seeing such a level of failure, a high level of failure?
I think you might be right. I also think a lot of what's happened encourages people to kind of, this is a baseball analogy, I don't know if we call it swinging for the fences, to go for a home run, as opposed to being satisfied with a smaller venture. And I think sometimes that's unfortunate. Not every idea is going to be Uber or Airbnb or Amazon.
Exactly.
And if that's what you're shooting for, you're going to have a very high percentage of failure.
And I think one more aspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a lot of businesses are being built to live off funding and rounds of funding and not as an actual business. So we're coming up with this idea, we're pushing this idea, we're pitching this idea, and then once we're getting the funding, we're working out, we haven't quite found a way to actually generate business from this idea.
or even if you have a business, to make money with that business.
Exactly. And I think that's one thing now that investors are really looking at. If you don't have the awesome idea and the business actually running and viable and making money, I don't think they're investing as much as what they used to, from what I've seen in the space.
I think you're absolutely right. We've tried to approach it from the other side. You mentioned how investors are looking at it. We've gone looking for entrepreneurs who I think are reacting to this differently. They're saying, you know what? The venture capital model is broken. The whole idea for a venture capitalist is to invest in a bunch of companies and know that a handful of them will succeed, but that will be enough for the venture capitalists to make money. But the vast majority of those entrepreneurs who got funded fail. And maybe they go, they live happy lives. They go on and they do something else, and it's not a tragedy. But they're not building a business that's going to last. There are entrepreneurs who are looking at that and saying, there's got to be another way to do this. And we've really tried to focus on other paths to business success. We just published something. We do an annual list of what we call small giants. If somebody wanted to check it out, they could just Google Forbes and small giants, and we'll find it.
We'll put the link in the actual video.
That would be fabulous.
Thank
you. It's a list of 25 companies, and these are all companies that have to meet certain requirements that we set. They have to have been around for 10 years. They have to be profitable. They have to have been recognized as leaders in their industry. They have to do something that's special that we think other businesses can learn from. And we're really proud of the list. And on top of that, they all have to be privately owned and tightly controlled. So there's a handful of them have some private equity, but they're run by the people who own them. It's not. There's no venture capital, and it's not there's no timeline. It's not as if they've got to make it work in 5 years, or somebody's going to demand their money out of the business. And as a result, some of these companies are just great companies. If you'd like, I can give you an example.
I'd love to.
There's one that I was really impressed by called Menlo Innovations. It's a software business in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So it's a tech business, but they took a very different approach. They make custom software, so they're not just They didn't just come up with a software product and then try to sell it to as many people as possible. They look for really interesting challenges to try to solve. One example that sticks in my mind is they helped a very large healthcare system develop a software program to manage their organ donor system. Something they were having trouble keeping track of, wanted to make it more efficient, to make sure that needed organs get to the right people at the right time. Clearly an important challenge, the kind of thing that they were excited about doing. But here's the thing about this company. They only take business that they find will be interesting and challenging, the kind of things they want to do. And as a result, they're not very large. They have less than $6 million in revenue. But they've developed a very special way of working. There are a lot of things that they do differently from other companies. One example is they have all their developers work in pairs. Nobody sits at a computer screen by his or herself. They do it in pairs. Just the basic idea, two minds are better than one. And it's not about typing speed, it's about coming up with good ideas, and if two people are working together, they think they're going to produce better code. They do things so differently that they get people who come and pay them money just to observe the way they run the business. They have executives who've flown in and paid them $20,000 to spend a week there, watching the workers and talking to the owners about how they built the company and why it works the way it does. As a result, they get more than 10% of their annual revenue from tours, from people who come just to observe how they do what they do. And here's the best part about it. That's their marketing. Their marketing department is a profit center. They get most of not only their new clients, but also their new employees out of the people who come to check out what it is they do and how they do it.
That's amazing.
That's a small giant. That's the kind of company that we go looking for.
If we can get our hands on maybe a video, we'd also link that as well, because I've never heard of that before. That's actually sensational.
We don't have a video of that company, but we do. We have links to a blurb, an article we did about it. There's another company you might find interesting, and this one's really timely, and we do have a video of it. It's a company called SRC. It's a manufacturing company based in Springfield, Missouri, and it started a little over 30 years ago. And it grew out of a failed factory. I think it was an International Harvester, which is a farm equipment manufacturer that was in the process of either selling or closing down the factory. And the workers there said, wait a second, we want to buy the business. And they borrowed some money, they bought it from the corporate parent, and they decided they would try to make a go of it. And what they had been doing was actually remanufacturing. They took old engines, I forget exactly what for, probably tractors, and rebuilt them so that they were like new, and then sold them at a discount to what you would have to pay to buy an entirely new engine. That was their basic business. They built from that a business that today is a mini conglomerate of more than 20 different businesses. They have more than $500 million a year in revenue.
Wow.
But here's the thing. They did it with a special process. Because this was a business that was essentially started by the workers from a factory, they decided to make the business employee-owned, and they decided, there was one guy in particular, a guy named Jack Stack, who's really a visionary, who was the main the main impetus behind this. He came up with something that someone else actually labeled. They call it open book management. And the point of this is they share their financials with the employees. And the idea is that if the employees really understand what's driving the business, they will have better ideas than the managers who are, off somewhere pretending they know what's really going on. And they also use something they call mini games. The idea is that if you teach employees the important numbers, help them understand what drives the business, what's more profitable. If you have two products and one has a high profit margin, one has a low profit margin, if the employees fully understand that, they'll make sure that they promote the high profit margin product over the low profit margin one. If you help them understand those kinds of things and create metrics so that they can, important metrics so they can follow what they're doing. The metric could be, if it's a manufacturing plant, the number of widgets they produce in a given period of time. It could be foot traffic that they're getting through the door, whatever it is. If you tell them what the important metric is and then make a game out of improving it, help them figure out ways to increase that number and track it over time and reward them if they do in fact improve it, you get employees who are much more engaged than typical employees. You hear a lot from business owners. People say all the time, if only I could get my employees to act as if they were owners. Well, here's the answer. Make them owners.
Exactly.
And that's what this company did. And here's the amazing thing. I told you this started in the 80s. There are people employing who are retiring from this business now after 30 years of working there, working, on an assembly line in a factory. They're retiring as millionaires.
Wow.
And the reason for this is because it's an employee-owned company, and because the company doesn't have huge profit margins. It's it's an old line, heavy manufacturing business. But at a time when everybody in this country is talking about why manufacturing is so difficult and so much of it is going elsewhere, here's a business where the factory workers are retiring as millionaires because of the system they use to run it. That's another one of our small giants, SRC.
Amazing.
And we do have a video of that explains the whole story.
We'll definitely link that one up too. So these are some amazing examples that really give you insight on doing things differently, not so typical and standard.
Everything is in this country, unfortunately, is focused on, Silicon Valley, venture-backed businesses, tech businesses, and there's nothing wrong with that. That certainly has a place in this world, but that's about 2 or 3% of the number of businesses in this country are venture-backed. There's a whole other world out there, and that's what we're trying to tap into here.
Yeah.
And it's hard because they're privately owned. Right here in Jersey City, this is not a big city. We're right across the river from New York, but right here in Jersey City, there could be any number of really cool businesses here that I'll never know exist. There's, because they're not publicly owned, there's nobody keeping track of them. We created this list to try to find as many as possible. We'll never find all of them. It's an impossible task.
Wow, sensational. So we've spoken about some of the businesses that we've come across that have done things differently. From what you've seen in the space, the current times we're in, we discussed earlier that we've seen many failures. The failure rate of businesses are at a very high rate, more than usual. What are some tips that we can give or tell people in order for them to avoid these failures, avoid these disappointments?
I think the main thing is, the one thing I've observed through the years is that business owners, whether they're young entrepreneurs or older small business owners, whoever they are, they're very smart about something, because you don't get a business off the ground if you're not smart about something. But there's nothing that can fully prepare you to run a business. It's impossible. There are just too many things that you have to figure out. So every business owner has some version of the same experience. They have a certain amount of success because they know something very well, but then they have to figure, whatever it is, whatever their blind spots are, they've got to figure out management or marketing or finance or hiring and firing, or there's something that they don't know how to do that they have to figure out. The other problem they tend to have is they can be very isolated. They're often in places where they don't know that many people who are trying to do what they're trying to do. Less true if you're in Silicon Valley, where obviously there's the entrepreneurial ecosystem. But there are lots of other places where people really struggle to find someone who has any knowledge of what they're going through. And that's a real problem, because what they really need is someone to talk to. There are no cookie cutter answers. One size doesn't fit all. There's no one handbook that's going to solve every problem. But I think the one thing, the tip I would give is try to find a community somewhere. Find peers somewhere. They're more and more available. There are peer organizations like Vistage that you can join, although that's pretty expensive. You have to be pretty established to be able to afford what they pay. But there are other organizations that don't cost as much. There's probably something in, unless you live in a rural area, which is a little bit more difficult, you can and then maybe there's something you can find online. They do exist online as well.
Yeah.
Find a place where you can talk to someone who knows what you're going through, and even if it's just to hear yourself say something out loud and think it through, because the problem a lot of owners face is there's nobody in their immediate circle to whom it makes sense to talk. You don't really want to talk about what's keeping you up at night with your employees. You don't want to scare them. You don't want to talk to your spouse about what's keeping you up at night because you don't want to scare them too much. And they may not really understand what you're going through. They don't want to know. Good luck, go do it, but I don't want to hear about all the problems. Tell me when you figure it out.
And you want to hear the good things.
So the tip I would give is, I think there are a lot of people out there who are eager to help. You have to be careful. You have to make sure you find the right person. It has to be a good fit, and it isn't always. So if it's not the right fit, move on, find somebody else.
I think one of the things that I've sort of experienced, because I was one of those people, I couldn't find that crowd, that community that had the same mindset, was trying to achieve the same goals as me. Not exactly like the exact same goal, but the mindset was there, that entrepreneurial mindset that's really working with that drive and motivation, that really wants to achieve something, and so on and so on. One thing I found was it's amazing who you can come across, and it's amazing how much people are willing to help. It's not everybody is a shark, not everybody's trying to steal your idea. Some people are genuinely content.
You couldn't be more right about that, and I think it really says something great about entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
As a journalist, I've covered politicians, I've covered athletes, I've covered business people and more corporate type business people. Good luck getting them to talk about the mistakes they've made.
Yeah.
But entrepreneurs, even if they're in a competitive industry, they want to help other people. They don't want other people to make the same mistakes they did. And by and large, I found them to be incredibly generous with their time. And I wouldn't have a job if that weren't true, because what we really look for is business owners who are willing to talk about their mistakes, because that's how everybody learns.
Awesome. So that is a bit of insight. Hopefully we can help a few people out there to go out there and find some sort of community that really relates to them and helps them build sometimes it's just confidence.
If you don't mind a small plug, I do a podcast.
Okay, awesome.
It's called Mind Your Business. It airs on the Wharton Business Network on Sirius Radio. It's on Sirius XM 111. It airs live Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S., but we also publish it as a podcast, and it's a call-in show. And it's exactly the idea we're talking about. I always have a guest on, somebody who's been through the battles,
the journey,
and we spend most of our time encouraging business owners to call in and tell us what they're struggling with. And we don't tell them what to do. We don't try to tell them how to run their business. We just have conversations. We kick around ideas and strategies.
Just listen. Just listen.
That's the whole idea.
That definitely will be linked in. Which comes to my final point. Where can people find you on social media? Do you rather than find your podcast? Does your podcast have social media channels, or iTunes or SoundCloud? Tell us.
On Twitter, I'm at L Feldman, Feldman.
We'll have all that up. Yeah.
Thank you. And what we do at Forbes is at Forbes.com/entrepreneurs, also Forbes.com/small-business. We have a couple of really good weekly newsletters that go out. So we publish a lot of stuff. If you want to start out just by looking for our best stuff, signing up for one of our newsletters, which you can easily find on our site, is a good way to go.
can we find your podcast on iTunes or
You can Forbes.com. If you
your personal one?
yes, it's on my blog. If you search my name, Loren, Loren Feldman, Feldman, and Forbes, you will find my blog on Forbes, and that's where I publish the podcast.
Awesome. Okay, man, that brings us to our conclusion. Thank you all for joining us on the Business Wilderness. Thank you, Loren. It's been great.
Ahmed, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.